The Hall of Concord was the most beautiful place in the known galaxy. It sat on the surface of Valeth Prime, a world with skies the color of pale gold and oceans that sang when the wind touched them. The hall itself was enormous. It could hold representatives from over 4,000 species, and today, almost every seat was filled. Ambassador Elara Voss stood at the center of it all. She was a small woman by human standards, thin shoulders, dark hair pulled back tight, eyes the color of wet earth. She wore the formal black uniform of the United Terran Diplomatic Corps, and she stood perfectly still on the speaker's platform while thousands of alien eyes, sensors, and other organs of perception focused on her. This was her 14th time standing here. 14 petitions, 14 requests for humanity to be accepted into the Galactic Concord, the vast alliance that connected the civilized species of the Orion Arm. And 14 times the answer had been the same. But she came back every time. That was the human way. The archspeaker of the Concord stepped forward to begin the session. His name was Ithari, and he was Selvan, a species made of living crystal. His body was tall and angular, like a sculpture carved from pale blue glass. When he moved, light bent through him and scattered across the walls in soft patterns. When he spoke, his voice came from deep inside his chest, resonating through his crystalline structure like a bell. The Assembly recognizes the petition of the species known as humans, from the world-designated Sol 3, also called Earth, Ithari said. His tone was formal, cold, not cruel. Exactly, but empty of warmth the way a medical report is empty of warmth. Before the petitioner speaks, the Assembly will review the standing classification of the petitioning species. Elara kept her face still. She knew what was coming. A holographic display activated above the center of the hall. It was massive, bright enough to fill the entire chamber with light. The seal of the Concord Behavioral Institute appeared first, the organization responsible for studying and classifying every known species in the galaxy. Then the data began. Earth appeared first, a small blue and green world spinning slowly in the black. It looked peaceful from a distance. Most dangerous things did. Sol 3, known to its inhabitants as Earth, a calm, automated voice narrated, classification, Category 9 Death World, hostile biosphere, no extreme environmental variation, high radiation, tectonic instability, predatory ecosystems across all climate zones. The display shifted to show Earth's wildlife, sharks cutting through dark water, lions pulling down prey on golden plains, wolves hunting in packs through snow, spiders, snakes, things with too many teeth, things with venom, things that killed not for food, but for territory. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The Luminar, tall, willowy beings who drew energy from light and had never evolved the concept of predation, leaned away from the display as if the images might reach out and touch them. Then the display showed humans. It started with ancient history, cave paintings, stone tools, spears. The narration continued in that same calm, clinical voice, describing humanity the way a scientist might describe a virus under a microscope. The dominant species of Sol 3 evolved as persistence predators, capable of tracking prey across vast distances over extended periods until the target collapsed from exhaustion. They are omnivorous, adaptable to nearly all terrestrial environments, and display a unique physiological trait: the ability to continue functioning under extreme pain, injury, and psychological trauma. The display showed human endurance, runners crossing deserts, climbers scaling frozen mountains, swimmers crossing open oceans. A man with a broken leg dragging himself across rocky ground for 3 days to reach help. Then it showed human warfare. The images came fast now: swords and shields, cannons and cavalry, trenches filled with mud and gas, cities burning under falling bombs. A mushroom cloud rising over a flattened landscape, soldiers charging into gunfire, ships sinking in black water, a man standing in front of a tank. The hall was silent, not the comfortable silence of agreement, the heavy silence of horror. Humans have engaged in organized conflict throughout their entire recorded history, the narration said. They have developed weapons capable of destroying their own world multiple times over. They have used these weapons on each other. Despite this, the species has not only survived but increased in population and technological capability. They appear to regard conflict as a natural state and have built cultural, economic, and political systems around the management and application of violence. The display showed one final sequence. It was footage from the Belt Wars, humanity's own internal conflict over mining rights in the asteroid belt, fought just 60 years ago. Ships tearing each other apart in the silence of space. Marines in powered armor breaching station hulls. Explosions blooming like flowers in the vacuum. And through it all, the humans were talking to each other, shouting orders, making jokes. One Marine, his suit cracked and leaking air, was laughing as he fired his weapon. Laughing. The display ended. The lights in the hall returned to normal. For a long moment, nobody moved. Archspeaker Ithari turned to Alara. The petitioner may now speak. Alara stepped forward. She looked out at the assembly. 4,000 species, most of whom had never set foot on a world that could kill them. My species that had evolved on gentle planets with stable climates and no predators. Species that had never known war because they had never needed to. Species that looked at humanity and saw only the monster. She took a breath. Everything you just saw is true, she said. A murmur ran through the hall. They had expected her to argue, to deny, to make excuses. We are violent, Alara continued. We have fought wars. We have killed each other in numbers that I know are difficult for many of you to understand. We built weapons that could end all life on our world, and we came very, very close to using them. She paused. But that is not the whole story. She raised her hand and activated her own display, a small, personal holo projector, nothing compared to the Concorde's grand system. It showed different images. A firefighter carrying a child from a burning building, a doctor working through the night in a tent hospital, a woman shielding a stranger's body with her own during a bombing, soldiers giving their food to refugees, a man diving into a frozen river to save a dog he had never seen before. We are also this, Alara said. We run toward danger, not because we are stupid, not because we do not feel fear. We feel fear more deeply than most species you have studied. Your own research confirms this. We run toward danger because someone on the other side of it needs help. She looked directly at Ithari. You classify us as dangerous. You are correct. We are the most dangerous species we have ever encountered, and we have encountered ourselves. But danger is not the same as evil. A scalpel is dangerous. A surgeon uses it to save lives. A fire is dangerous. A cold family gathers around it to survive the night. She straightened her shoulders. We are not asking you to forget our past. We are asking you to see our future. 14 times I have stood here. 14 times you have said no. And 14 times I have come back, because that is what humans do. We do not stop. We do not give up. And we do not abandon the hope that one day you will see us as we truly are. Not as the monsters you fear, but as the allies you need. The hall was quiet again, but this time Alara thought she could feel something shifting in that silence. Not much, not enough, but something. Ithari stepped forward. His crystalline body caught the light and scattered it in patterns that Alara had learned to read over the years. Right now, the patterns were tight and controlled. He was uncomfortable. Now, the assembly will now vote, he said. The vote took less than a minute. Thousands of delegates registered their decisions simultaneously through the Concorde's neural link system. The results appeared on the central display. Against, 3,812. In favor, 6. Abstentions, 244. Alara read the numbers. Her face did not change. She had stopped letting the numbers hurt her after the 7th petition. The petition is denied, Ithari said. The species known as humans remains classified as Category 9 and is not eligible for membership in the Galactic Concorde at this time. The petitioner is thanked for her time. He did not look at her when he said it. Alara gave a small, respectful nod to the assembly, gathered her materials, and walked out of the hall. Her footsteps echoed on the polished floor. 4,000 species watched her go, and not one of them said a word. The walk back to the human shuttle dock was long. Valeth Prime was a beautiful world. Soft light, warm air, the distant sound of those singing oceans. Elara walked through gardens filled with plants from 100 different worlds, past fountains that flowed with water so pure it was almost silver. Everything was peaceful. Everything was gentle. Everything was exactly what humanity was not, according to the galaxy. She reached the dock and boarded the shuttle that would take her back to the steady horizon, the diplomatic vessel waiting in orbit. The shuttle was small and functional, human engineering at its most practical. No decorations, no luxury, just a machine built to do a job. Captain Jonah Meru was waiting for her on the steady horizon. He was a tall man, broad across the shoulders, and with dark skin and a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. A souvenir from the Belt Wars. He had the quiet, steady presence of a man who had seen too much to be surprised by anything, but still found reasons to keep going. He was leaning against the bulkhead outside the airlock when Elara stepped aboard. "How did it go?" he asked. Elara pulled off her diplomatic gloves and tucked them into her belt. "Same as last time. They are afraid of us." Meru nodded slowly. He looked out the viewport at the golden curve of Valeth Prime below them. "Good," he said. "Fear means they are paying attention." Elara looked at him. 14 times, Jonah. Then we come back a 15th. She almost smiled. Almost. You really believe they will change their minds? Meru was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I believe that sooner or later, something is going to happen that makes them need us. And when that day comes, we will be ready. Not because we want to prove them wrong, but because that is who we are. Elara said nothing. She walked past him toward her quarters, her boots clicking on the metal deck. Behind her, Meru stayed at the viewport, watching the stars. He did not know how right he was. None of them did. Far away, so far that light itself would take millions of years to cross the distance, something stirred in the void between galaxies. It was old, older than most of the stars in the Orion Arm. It had no name because it had never encountered anything capable of naming it. It simply was. It moved slowly, but it moved with purpose. It had consumed other galaxies before, other civilizations, other species that thought themselves eternal. They were gone now, and it remained. Its sensors, if they could be called sensors, reached across the dark and touched the edges of the Milky Way. It felt the warmth of billions of stars, the hum of electromagnetic signals, the movement of ships between worlds. Life. It had been a long time since it had encountered life in such quantity. Deep inside its vast structure, something that served as a mind made a decision that was less a thought and more a reflex. The same decision it had made 1,000 times before, across 1,000 galaxies, over a span of time that made the age of the universe look small. It began to move faster. On the frontier of the galactic Concord, in a region of space known as the Thirak Expanse, a small monitoring station detected something unusual, a flicker in the background radiation, a shadow where there should have been light. The station's automated systems flagged the anomaly and filed a routine report. Nobody read it. There were too many routine reports and too few people who cared about the empty spaces between the stars. The shadow grew larger, and in the Hall of Concord, the species of the galaxy went about their business, trading, debating, building, exploring, secure in the belief that their civilization was eternal, that their alliance was unbreakable, and that the most dangerous thing in the universe was the small, aggressive species from the death world called Earth. They were wrong. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. But when they did, when the darkness came and the stars began to go out, there was only one species in the galaxy that would not be surprised. When only one species that had spent its entire existence fighting things bigger and stronger and more terrible than itself. Only one species that looked into the void and bared its teeth. The humans were waiting. They had always been waiting. The first colony to go silent was called Valeth 4. It was a small world on the edge of the Thirak Expanse, a mining colony run by the Karathi, a species of short, sturdy beings covered in thick gray fur. There were about 40,000 of them on Valeth 4. They mined rare metals from the planet's crust and shipped them back to the Concord core worlds. It was boring work on a boring planet, and nobody thought much about it. Then one morning, Varith 4 stopped transmitting. No distress signal, no final message. No warning of any kind. The communication feed simply went dead. It's like someone had reached out and turned off a light. The Concord Communication Authority flagged it as a technical failure. Equipment broke down all the time on Frontier Worlds. They sent a repair request to the nearest relay station and moved on to other business. 3 days later, the relay station went silent too. Then another colony, then another. In the span of 2 weeks, 7 Concord settlements along the Thyrak Expanse border stopped transmitting. 40,000 here, 100,000 there. Nearly 500,000 beings, gone quiet all at once. Now people started paying attention. The Concord dispatched scout ships, fast, lightly armed vessels designed for long-range reconnaissance. 3 ships were sent to Varath 4. They were supposed to arrive, assess the situation, and report back within 48 hours. Or they never reported back. A second group was sent, 5 ships this time, with better sensors and heavier weapons. They jumped to the Varath system and found nothing. The planet was there. The mining stations were there. The orbital platforms, the communication arrays, the supply depots. All of it was still physically present. But it was all dead, not destroyed. Dead. The power systems had been drained. Every battery, every reactor, every stored energy cell. Empty. The structures were intact but cold and dark, like the skeleton of something that had once been alive. And the people were gone. Not a single body, not a single trace. 40,000 Kirathi had simply vanished, as if they had never existed. The scout commander, a Selvan officer named Taeth, sent a single transmission back to the Concord before his sensors detected something moving at the edge of the system. "There is something here," Taeth transmitted. "Something large. It is..." The transmission ended. None of the 5 ships returned. Now the Concord was afraid. An emergency session was called at the Hall of Concord. Archspeaker Ithari stood before the assembly, and for the first time in Elara Voss's memory, the crystalline patterns of his body were jagged and unsteady, the Selvan equivalent of fear. "We are facing an unknown threat along the Thyrak frontier," Ithari told the assembly. 12 settlements have gone silent. All scout missions have failed to return. The Concord Military Command recommends an immediate armed response. The assembly voted quickly. For once, there was no debate. A battle fleet was assembled. 600 warships from 3 of the Concord's most powerful military species. The Drelkathi provided 200 heavy cruisers, each one crewed by a hive mind of linked soldiers who thought and fought as a single organism. The Vathori, a reptilian species known for their advanced weapons technology, sent another 200 ships armed with plasma lances and gravitational disruptors. The Selvan themselves contributed 200 of their crystalline warships, elegant and fast, designed to fight at extreme range with focused light weapons. It was the largest military deployment the Concord had authorized in over 300 years. Fleet Commander Selkari, a Drelkathi Hive Admiral, led the force into the Thyrak Expanse. His fleet moved in perfect formation, the Drelkathi in the center, Chirud the Vathori on the flanks, the Selvayan in the rear providing long-range fire support. It was textbook military strategy, refined over centuries of simulated combat. They had never fought a real war. None of them had. The Concord had not faced a genuine military threat in over 1,000 years. Their fleets existed as a precaution, a theoretical response to a theoretical danger. The danger they found was not theoretical. They detected it on long-range sensors first. A mass of energy and matter so vast that the sensors could not determine its edges. It filled the space ahead of them, like a wall of darkness, stretching across light years. Individual structures within the mass were visible. Enormous constructs, some the size of small moons, others larger than planets. They moved slowly but steadily, and advancing through space with the patience of a glacier. Fleet Commander Selkari ordered all ships to battle stations. He opened a communication channel to the unknown entity. Standard Concord First Contact Protocol. He transmitted greetings in 400 languages, mathematical sequences, prime numbers, universal constants. Everything the Concord had developed over millennia to say, "We are here and we wish to talk." There was no response. He transmitted again. And again, and again. Silence. Then the darkness moved. The first wave hit the Concorde fleet like a fist. Energy beams. Not light, not plasma. Something else entirely. Something the sensors could not identify. Cut through the formation. Ships did not explode. They simply went dark, their power drained in an instant. Their crews left floating in dead hulls. Selkari ordered a counterattack. The Drelkathi cruisers opened fire with everything they had. The Vithori plasma lances blazed. The Selvan light weapons struck the nearest construct with focused beams bright enough to blind unshielded eyes. Nothing happened. The weapons hit the constructs and were absorbed. Not deflected, not destroyed. Absorbed like water poured onto dry sand. The second wave was worse. Smaller entities, each one the size of a large ship, detached from the main mass and moved toward the fleet with terrifying speed. They did not fire weapons. They simply attached themselves to Concorde ships and began to pull them apart, piece by piece, absorbing the materials into their own structures. It was not combat, it was feeding. The battle, if it could be called a battle, lasted 87 minutes. Of the 600 Concorde warships, 43 survived long enough to retreat. The rest were consumed. The survivors limped back to Concorde space carrying sensor data and stories that nobody wanted to believe. Fleet Commander Selkari was among the dead. His last transmission, recorded by a fleeing Selvan cruiser, was calm and precise, the hive mind processing its own destruction with clinical clarity. The enemy does not communicate, it does not negotiate, it does not respond to any known form of contact. It consumes energy and matter without preference or discrimination. It is not hostile in the way we understand hostility. It is simply thorough. A pause. We are being erased. Then nothing. The recordings were played before the full assembly at the Hall of Concord. A 4,000 species listened in silence as the data scrolled across the displays. The scale of the threat became clear very quickly. Based on the sensor readings, the entity, which the media had already begun calling the Absence, was not a single ship or even a fleet. It was a swarm, a vast collective of structures that stretched across an area of space larger than most star systems. And it was moving toward the Concorde core worlds at a steady, unhurried pace. The projected timeline was 8 months until it reached the first major conquered homeworld. Panic spread faster than the news. Species began recalling their fleets from shared defense positions to protect their own systems. Trade routes shut down as merchant vessels refused to travel the frontier. The economic systems that held the Concorde together started to crack. Old tensions between species resurfaced as each civilization began to calculate its own chances of survival, and those calculations rarely included their neighbors. The Concorde, which had stood for millennia as a symbol of galactic cooperation, began to fall apart in a matter of weeks. Emergency meetings were held every day. Plans were proposed and rejected. Some species wanted to fight. Others wanted to flee. The Luminar proposed trying to communicate with the Absence through light-based meditation. The Drelkathi demanded a massive military buildup. The Vithori suggested a coordinated evacuation of all frontier worlds. Nobody could agree on anything, because nobody had ever faced anything like this before. And on the edges of conquered space, watching everything with quiet, careful attention, the humans already knew. The United Terran Command had intelligence operatives embedded throughout the Concorde frontier. They operated under false identities, a difficult task when you were the only species in the galaxy that sweated, bled red, and could eat practically anything without dying. But humans were good at pretending to be something they were not. It was one of their oldest skills. The operatives had been tracking the anomalies in the Thyrak expanse for months, long before the Concorde noticed. Human long-range sensor platforms, hidden in deep space where nobody thought to look, had detected the approaching mass and transmitted the data back to Earth. Admiral Rana Cortez received the full intelligence package in her office aboard the orbital command station above Earth. She was 62 years old, lean and sharp-featured, with silver hair cut close to her skull and eyes that missed nothing. She had commanded the Terran Navy through the final years of the Belt Wars and had overseen the rebuilding of the fleet in the decades since. She read the reports. She studied the sensor data. She watched the recordings of the Concorde fleet's destruction 3 times, making notes each time. Then she called a meeting of the UTC Joint Chiefs. The briefing room was deep inside the command station, shielded and secured. Around the table sat the commanders of every branch of the Terran military: Navy, Marines, Intelligence, Strategic Command. They were hard people, all of them, scarred by wars they had fought against each other before the unification. But they were also calm, focused, professional. Cortez stood at the head of the table and activated the display. This is what the Concord is calling the absence, she said, showing the sensor data. Extragalactic in origin, semi-organic construction. It consumes energy and matter. It does not communicate, and it does not respond to any form of contact. Based on the available data, it has been doing this for a very, very long time. She let them study the numbers. The room was quiet. The Concord sent 600 ships against it, Cortez continued. They lost 557 in under 90 minutes. The enemy absorbed their weapons fire and pulled their ships apart like they were made of paper. General Hassan, the Marine Commandant, leaned forward. What did the Concord do wrong? Everything, Cortez said. They fought defensively, held formation, tried to establish communication before engaging. By the time they realized communication was not going to work, the enemy was already inside their lines. They had no contingency plan because they never needed one. The Concord has not fought a real war in 1,000 years. And we have? Asked Admiral Chen, the fleet operations commander. We fought the Belt Wars 60 years ago. Before that, we fought each other for 10,000 years straight. We have been fighting things that want to kill us since before we came down from the trees. Cortez switched the display to show human tactical projections. The Concord fights like engineers. Clean, logical, efficient. They build perfect plans and follow them perfectly, and when the plan fails, they have nothing left. She paused. We do not fight like that. No, General Hassan agreed. Wait, we do not. A young intelligence analyst named Lieutenant Priya Sharma raised her hand from the back of the room. She was new to the Joint Chiefs briefing circle, and she looked nervous, but her voice was steady. Ma'am, the Concord's problem is not just tactical, Sharma said. It is psychological. The absence does not respond to anything they do. It does not get angry. It does not get scared. It does not slow down. That is the worst possible enemy for species that have never faced a real predator. They do not know what to do with something that cannot be reasoned with. Cortez looked at her. And we do. Sharma met her eyes. We have been fighting things that are not afraid of dying since we invented the spear. We hunted mammoths. We killed saber-toothed cats. We fought wars against diseases that could not be seen and could not be bargained with. The absence is just another predator. It is big, and it is old, and it is powerful. But it is still just a predator. And we are the species that learned how to kill every predator we ever met. The room was quiet for a moment. Then General Hassan smiled. A thin, hard smile that did not reach his eyes. I like her, he said to Cortez. Cortez did not smile. She turned back to the display and brought up a galactic map. The absence's projected advance was marked in red, a slowly expanding wave moving through the Therac expanse toward the Concord core. The Concord has not asked for our help, Cortez said. They will not want to ask. They would rather lose 100 worlds than admit they need the species they have been calling monsters for 300 years. She zoomed in on the red wave. But they will ask, because sooner or later, they will run out of options. And when that day comes, when the most civilized species in the galaxy finally pick up the phone and call the monsters, we are going to be ready. She looked around the table. Begin full fleet mobilization. Quietly. I do not want the Concord to know what we are doing until we are ready. Run every war simulation we have against the available data. Find weaknesses. Find patterns. Find anything we can use. She shut off the display. They think we are the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. Let us go prove them right. On Valeth Prime, in the Hall of Concord, our Archspeaker Yathari stood alone in the empty chamber long after the last delegates had left. The golden light of the planet's sun streamed through the crystal walls, but it did not warm him. Nothing warmed him now. He looked at the galactic map still floating above the central platform, the red markers showing silenced colonies, the projected advance of the absence, the slowly shrinking circle of safe space. An aide, a young Selvan named Keth, entered quietly. Archspeaker, the Defense Committee is requesting your presence for the evening session. Ithari did not turn around. His crystalline body was dim, the light patterns sluggish and heavy. Among the Selvan, this was the deepest expression of dread. Keth, he said quietly, pull the diplomatic files on the human species. Keth hesitated. The humans? Sir? Yes. May I ask why? Ithari stared at the red markers on the map. 8 months. That was all the time they had. 8 months until the darkness reached them, and everything they had built, every alliance, every achievement, every peaceful world in the Concord, would be consumed by something that did not even notice they existed. Because, Ithari said, and his voice resonated through the empty hall like a cracked bell, I think we are going to need the monsters. Keth said nothing. He went to pull the files. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, the absence moved closer. It did not hurry. It had never needed to hurry. Everything it had ever encountered had eventually stopped moving, stopped fighting, stopped existing. It did not know that this time would be different. It had never met humans before. When the Concorde diplomatic shuttle entered the Sol system under a white flag protocol that had not been used in over 100 years, it was a small, graceful vessel, Selvan-made, all crystal and light, and it looked completely out of place among the heavy, angular shapes of human space. Human space was not beautiful. It was functional. Orbital stations bristled with sensor arrays and weapon platforms. Defense satellites hung in precise grids around Earth and its moon. Mining platforms chewed through asteroids in the belt. Cargo haulers, military frigates, and civilian transports moved in organized streams along designated lanes. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was decorative. It was the architecture of a species that had learned, through long and painful experience, that the universe was not a safe place. The shuttle was escorted by 4 Terran Navy destroyers from the moment it entered the system. The destroyers were ugly ships by galactic standards, blocky, armored, covered in weapon hardpoints and sensor domes. They moved with a mechanical precision that the shuttle's passengers found unsettling. Aboard the shuttle were 7 beings. Archspeaker Ithari led the delegation, his crystalline form dimmer than usual, the light patterns in his body tight and controlled. Behind him sat military commanders from 7 Concorde species: Drokathi, Vithori, Selvan, Luminar, Kirathi, and 2 others. They were the best the Concorde had left. They were also, by their own admission, not enough. They had come to ask for help from the species they had rejected 14 times. The shuttle docked at Geneva Station, humanity's primary diplomatic hub. It hung in high orbit above Earth, and through the viewports, the Concorde delegates could see the planet below, blue and white and green, shining in the sunlight. It looked so small, so ordinary. It was hard to believe that this little world had produced the most feared species in the galaxy. The airlock opened, and the delegates stepped onto Geneva Station. The difference from Concorde stations was immediate and visceral. Where the Hall of Concorde was open, airy, and filled with natural light, Geneva Station was enclosed, pressurized, and lit by harsh overhead panels. The corridors were narrow and lined with conduits and pipes. The air smelled like recycled atmosphere and metal. Everything was gray or dark green, and the walls were scarred with dents, scratches, and the faded markings of repair work. Weapon lockers stood at regular intervals along the main corridors. Emergency pressure suits hung beside every door. The station was not just a diplomatic facility, it was a fortress that happened to have meeting rooms. The Concorde delegates walked in tight formation, their guards flanking them. They passed human personnel in the corridors, men and women in military uniforms or civilian work clothes, all of them moving with purpose. The humans glanced at the aliens with curiosity but not surprise. They had been expecting this visit. What unsettled the delegates most was not the station or the weapons or the grim functionality of everything. It was the humans themselves. They were smaller than most Concorde species, softer. They had no armor, no claws, no venom, no crystalline structure, no hive mind. And they were made of meat and bone and water, and they broke easily. But they did not move like prey. They moved like predators, confident, alert, watching everything with eyes that tracked movement and calculated distance. Even the civilians had that quality. The Luminar delegate, a being named Soleth, whispered to Ithari that it felt like walking through a den of sleeping hunters. They were led to a conference room deep inside the station. It was large but plain, a long metal table, chairs sized for humans but with adaptive modifications for alien anatomy, a holographic display at one end, and a single viewport showing the curve of Earth below. Ambassador Ilara Voss was there. She stood near the viewport in her black diplomatic uniform, her hands folded behind her back. Her face was calm, neutral. She did not smile when the delegates entered, and she did not frown. She simply watched them take their seats with the patience of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this moment. But it was not Voss who would lead this meeting. Fleet Admiral Rena Cortez entered the room after the delegates were seated. She wore the dark blue uniform of the Terran Navy, decorated with service ribbons and rank insignia that the aliens could not read but understood instinctively. She was not tall, but she filled the room. There was a weight to her presence, the kind of gravity that came from decades of command and the absolute confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. She sat at the head of the table and looked at the Concord delegation. She did not greet them formally. She did not welcome them to Earth. She simply opened a datapad and said, "Tell me everything." Ithari was unprepared for this. He had rehearsed a speech on the journey to Sol. He had planned to open with an acknowledgement of past disagreements, a formal expression of regret, a carefully worded appeal to shared interests. Instead, the human admiral was looking at him with eyes like gun barrels and waiting for a tactical briefing. He adjusted. He was, after all, the arch-speaker of the Galactic Concord. He had managed 4,000 species for decades. He could manage one human. The entity we have designated as the Absence has consumed 31 Concord settlements, Ithari said. Our military response was insufficient. We lost 557 warships in a single engagement. The Absence is advancing toward the core worlds at a constant rate. Our projections indicate that it will reach the first major homeworld in approximately 5 months. Cortez listened without interrupting. When Ithari finished, she began asking questions. Force composition of the enemy. How many individual structures? Ithari looked at his military advisors. The Drelkathi commander, a hive officer named Chelkri, answered. Our best estimates suggest several thousand constructs of varying size. The largest are comparable in mass to small moons. The smallest are equivalent to capital ships. Weapon systems? Energy-draining beams of unknown type. The constructs also detach smaller units that physically dismantle enemy vessels and absorb the materials. Weaknesses? Silence. The Concord commanders looked at each other. We have identified no weaknesses, Chelkri said. Cortez nodded as if this was expected. She made a note on her datapad. Communication attempts. All failed. The Absence does not respond to any form of contact. Confirmed kills? Did any of your weapons do measurable damage to any construct? Another silence. Longer this time. No, Chelkri said. Our weapons were absorbed. Cortez set down her datapad and looked at the delegation. Her expression had not changed throughout the briefing. She was not shocked. She was not frightened. She was processing information the way a surgeon processes an X-ray. Clinically, completely, looking for the thing that would tell her where to cut. Acceptable losses, she said. What is your threshold? How many ships, how many personnel are you prepared to lose to stop this thing? The question hit the delegation like a physical blow. Several of the commanders recoiled. The Luminar delegate, Soleth, actually stood up from the table, his photosynthetic fronds rippling with distress. Acceptable losses? Soleth repeated. We do not. That is not a concept we. It is now, Cortez said. Her voice was not harsh, but it was firm, like a doctor telling a patient something they did not want to hear. The enemy you are facing does not negotiate, does not retreat, and does not stop. The only way to fight something like that is to be willing to pay a price that the enemy cannot match. That means losses, real losses, ships, people, worlds if necessary. She leaned forward. I need to know if you understand that, because if you came here looking for a painless solution, You came to the wrong species. The room was quiet. Oh, Ithari's crystalline form flickered with complex patterns. Fear, determination, resignation, all mixed together. We understand, he said. Good. Cortez opened a new file on her datapad. Then here are our terms. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. Humanity would commit its full military force to the defense of the Galactic Concord. Human ships, human soldiers, human commanders. In return, the United Terran Command would have operational authority over all joint military actions. Human admirals would command the combined fleet. Human tactical doctrine would be followed. And when the war was over, when the absence was stopped, humanity would take its place in the Galactic Concord, not as a junior member, not as a probationary species, as a full founding member of whatever new alliance emerged from the ashes. You came to us because everything you built could not stop what is coming, Cortez said. You do not get to ask for our blood and then negotiate the price. The Concord delegates argued. They protested. They cited centuries of tradition, protocols, and membership requirements. Cortez listened to all of it with the same calm expression, and when they were finished, she said, "Those are our terms. Take them or leave." Ithari looked at his delegation. He looked at the data showing the absence advancing through Concord space, consuming everything in its path. He looked at the viewport where Earth hung in the darkness, small, blue, impossibly defiant. "We accept," he said. The news spread across human space within hours. On Earth, in the great shipyards of the Pacific Orbital Complex, saw construction lights blaze to life on vessels that had been sitting in dry dock for decades. Ships that had been mothballed after the Belt Wars were pulled from storage, refitted, and armed. New ships were laid down on accelerated production schedules. Factories that had been making civilian goods switched to military production overnight. On Mars, the Marine Training Command activated its reserve units. Men and women who had hung up their uniforms years ago received calls in the middle of the night and reported to assembly points by morning. The corridors of the training bases, quiet for years, thundered with boots again. On Luna, the Strategic Weapons Division began producing antimatter warheads at a rate that would have alarmed anyone who was not already alarmed. Humanity was going to war. And humanity knew how to do that better than anything else. But it was not all steel and fire. In a small apartment on Geneva Station, a Marine sergeant named David Okafor sat on the edge of his bunk and read a bedtime story to his daughter over a video call. She was 4 years old and lived on Earth with her mother. The signal delay made the conversation awkward. His words arriving a second late, her laughter reaching him a second after that. But he read the story all the way through because he had promised her he would. When she fell asleep, he sat looking at the blank screen for a long time. Then he stood up, put on his armor, and went to join his unit. In the medical bay of the carrier Unconquered Sun, a doctor named Anya Reeves was studying alien physiology files. She had been doing this in secret for years, downloading Concord medical databases, learning the biology of species she had never met, preparing for a day she hoped would come. Now it had. She organized her notes, prepared treatment protocols for 7 different alien species, and made sure the medical bay was stocked with supplies that most human doctors had never heard of. In the chapel of the same carrier, a chaplain named Father Thomas held a multi-faith service. Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, and everything in between sat together in the small room and listened to him speak. He did not talk about God or gods. He talked about duty and sacrifice and the simple, terrifying act of choosing to stand between something you loved and something that wanted to destroy it. "When we are going to fight for people who do not like us," he said. "People who called us monsters. People who shut the door in our face 14 times. And we are going to fight for them anyway, because that is what makes us human. Not the violence, not the weapons. The choice to protect someone even when they do not deserve it." The room was quiet when he finished. Then someone in the back started to clap, and the sound spread until every person in the chapel was applauding. On the observation deck of Geneva Station, a group of Concord military observers watched human Marines training in a zero-gravity combat simulator. The Marines moved with brutal efficiency, breaching mock airlocks, clearing rooms, taking down targets with short, precise bursts of fire. They communicated in clipped commands and hand signals, and anticipating each other's movements as if they shared a hive mind. But they did not share a hive mind. That was what made it terrifying. They were individuals, separate beings with separate thoughts and separate fears, who had trained themselves to function as a unit through sheer discipline and trust. Any one of them could break. Any one of them could freeze or run or fall apart. And they knew this. They trained knowing that the person next to them was just as fragile and just as scared as they were. The Luminar observer Solith stood at the edge of the observation deck and watched a squad of Marines run the breach drill for the 5th time. Each time was faster, more precise, more violent. "How do they do it?" Solith asked. His voice was barely a whisper. How do they train their people to run toward death?" A human sergeant was standing nearby, a stocky woman with close-cropped hair and a scar across her chin. She had been assigned as a liaison to the Concord observers and had spent most of the day answering questions about human military doctrine. Most of the questions had been some variation of, "Why are you like this?" She looked at Solith. She thought about the question. "We do not train them to run toward death," she said. "We train them to run toward each other." Solith looked at her. His fronds shifted colors, confusion perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. "I do not understand," he said. The sergeant pointed at the Marines in the simulator. A squad member had been hit by a simulated weapon, his suit flashing red to indicate a wound. Without hesitation, two other Marines broke from cover, grabbed him, and dragged him to safety while a third laid down covering fire. "See that?" the sergeant said. "He is hurt. He cannot move. In your military, what happens?" "The mission continues," Solith said. "The wounded individual is left until the area is secured. In ours, they go back for him. Every time. No matter what. Because every Marine knows that if they go down, someone is coming to get them. That is not a tactic. It is a promise. And it is the reason they are willing to walk into hell in the first place." She looked at him. "We are not brave because we are not afraid. We are brave because we are afraid, and we go anyway, because someone we care about is on the other side." Solith said nothing for a long time. He watched the Marines run the drill again, and this time, he watched not the violence but the hands reaching back, the bodies covering bodies, the instinct to protect that ran through everything they did like a current through a wire. "I think," he said quietly, "that we have misunderstood your species very badly." The sergeant shrugged. "Most people do." 3 weeks after the agreement was signed, the Terran 1st Expeditionary Fleet departed Seoul. 1,200 warships, the largest human armada ever assembled. Carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, frigates, support vessels, hospital ships, and ammunition haulers. They moved in formation through the jump lanes toward Concord space, and every ship that could carry a weapon was carrying one. Aboard the flagship Unconquered Sun, Admiral Cortez stood on the bridge and watched the stars shift as the fleet accelerated. Behind her, the bridge crew worked in focused silence, checking systems, running calculations, coordinating with the other ships. Everything was professional, efficient, calm. Captain Meru stood beside her. He had been assigned as her flag captain, the commander of the Unconquered Sun itself, while Cortez commanded the fleet. He still carried the scar from the Belt Wars. He still had the same steady, quiet presence. "The Concord observers are settling in," he told Cortez. Most of them looked terrified. "Of the absence? Of us?" Cortez almost smiled. "They will get used to it." "Will they?" "They will have to." She looked at the star map on the main display. The red markers of the absence were spreading through the thyric expanse like a bloodstain on cloth. Somewhere in that darkness, millions of beings who had never asked for help were waiting for someone to come. "All ships," Cortez said, her voice carrying across the fleet-wide communication channel. "This is Admiral Cortez. Set course for the Thyrac Expanse. Combat speed." She paused. 1,200 ships waited. "Let us go introduce ourselves." The fleet jumped. The stars blurred and vanished, and humanity went to war. Not for territory, not for resources, not for revenge, but because someone somewhere needed help. That was always the reason. It was the only reason that mattered. The first joint engagement happened at a world called Thyrus 7, a gas giant with 6 habitable moons. 3 of those moons were home to Concord colonies, mining settlements, research stations, agricultural communities. 200,000 beings lived there, so when the absence was 12 hours away from reaching them. Admiral Cortez positioned the combined fleet in a defensive arc around the moons. The Concord ships, what was left of them, about 800 vessels from a dozen species, formed the outer ring. The human fleet held the center and the flanks. The Concord commanders expected to hold a line. That was how they fought. Form a barrier, absorb the enemy's attack, and protect the asset behind you. It was defensive thinking, fortress thinking, the thinking of species that had never needed to do anything else. Cortez had other ideas. When the absence appeared on long-range sensors, a wave of darkness rolling through space like a tide, Cortez did not order a defensive formation. Instead, she sent 3 squadrons of human destroyers racing forward at maximum speed, straight toward the enemy. The Concord commanders panicked. Hive Admiral Chelcree, the Drelkathi officer who had been assigned as liaison to the Joint Command, immediately opened a channel to the unconquered sun. Admiral Cortez, your forward elements are advancing directly into the enemy's path. They will be destroyed. Call them back. No, Cortez said. Admiral, this is not a rational course of action. You are sending ships to their deaths for no tactical purpose. The purpose is to learn, Cortez said. Watch. The 3 destroyer squadrons hit the absence's leading edge at full speed. They did not try to hold position. They did not form a line. They slashed across the enemy's front, firing weapons in short, focused bursts, not to destroy, but to test. They hit different constructs with different weapon types: kinetic rounds, plasma, Mach-directed energy, electromagnetic pulses, nuclear detonations at close range. Each squadron targeted a different section of the enemy and recorded every piece of data their sensors could capture. The absence reacted. Energy beams reached out toward the destroyers, draining power from any ship that stayed in one place for more than a few seconds. Smaller constructs detached and moved to intercept. The response was fast, efficient, and lethal, but it was also predictable. The human destroyers did not stay in one place. They weaved and dodged, changing course in patterns that made no tactical sense to the Concord observers. Some ships accelerated toward the enemy and then suddenly reversed. Others flew in wide circles, drawing pursuit away from the main fleet. 2 ships collided with each other deliberately, merged their wreckage, and tumbled into an absence construct as a combined mass of burning metal and detonating munitions. It was chaos. Beautiful, terrible, calculated chaos. And the absence did not know what to do with it. The enemy's hive logic operated on optimization. It predicted enemy behavior based on patterns. It calculated the most efficient response to each threat and executed it perfectly. Against the Concord's ordered, logical fleets, this worked flawlessly. The enemy could predict where ships would be, how they would respond, and what they would do next. Humans did not behave logically. The destroyers lost 14 ships in the opening exchange, but the data they sent back was worth every one of those ships, and every crew member aboard them knew it before they launched. Back on the unconquered sun, Lieutenant Priya Sharma, the young intelligence analyst who had impressed the Joint Chiefs months ago, led a team of tactical analysts processing the incoming data in real time. They worked fast, pulling patterns from the chaos, building a picture of how the absence thought. It is reactive, Sharma reported to Cortez, not creative. It responds to threats based on efficiency calculations. If a ship attacks from position A, the enemy sends interceptors along the optimal response vector. Every time. Same stimulus, same response. Like an immune system, Cortez said. Exactly. It is not thinking. It is processing. And it has never encountered a species that deliberately makes irrational choices in combat. Define irrational. Sacrificing a ship to test a theory. Attacking a position you cannot hold to draw resources away from a position you can. Retreating when you are winning to change the tempo. Everything we have been doing for the last 40 minutes is irrational by the enemy's standards, and it is struggling to adapt. Cortez studied the data. The absence's response times were slower against the human ships than they had been against the Concord fleet. Not by much. Seconds, maybe. But in combat, seconds were everything. "Find me a weakness," she said. "Something structural, something we can break." "Working on it." The battle at Thyra 7 lasted 11 hours. The human fleet fought in rotating waves, fresh squadrons cycling forward as exhausted ones pulled back to rearm and repair. The conquered ships held the defensive perimeter, here protecting the moons while the human ships bled, the absence dry, one cut at a time. The humans lost 93 ships. The absence lost nothing, not permanently, but it slowed. For the first time since it had entered the galaxy, the wave of darkness paused. It did not retreat. It simply stopped advancing, as if recalculating. The colonies on Thera 7's moons were evacuated safely. 200,000 lives saved. It was not a victory, but it was a start. Over the following weeks, the joint fleet fought a running campaign across the Thyrak expanse. Every engagement followed the same pattern. Human ships attacking aggressively, probing the enemy, gathering data, while Concord ships defended civilian populations and infrastructure. The culture clash was severe. Concord commanders were horrified by human tactics. The willingness to sacrifice ships, the deliberate disorder, the way human officers made decisions on instinct, adapting in real time without waiting for orders from above. A Concord fleet operated like a machine, every component following the plan. A human fleet operated like a living thing, messy, unpredictable, and impossible to kill cleanly because no single part of it was essential. Captain Meru led many of the most dangerous missions. His squadron of frigates specialized in deep penetration runs, plunging into the heart of absence formations to plant sensor beacons, test new weapons, and gather intelligence. Each run cost ships. Each run was worth it. After one particularly brutal mission, 6 ships out, for 3 ships back, Meru sat in the wardroom of the Steady Horizon with blood on his uniform and a cup of cold coffee in his hand. A Concord liaison officer, a young Bathory named Kreth, sat across from him, staring at the casualty reports. "How do you do this?" Kreth asked. Her reptilian face was difficult to read, but her voice shook. "How do you send people to die, and then sit here and drink coffee?" Meru looked at her. His eyes were tired, not empty, just tired. The kind of tired that went deeper than sleep could reach. "I do not send them to die," he said. "I send them to fight. Sometimes fighting means dying. They know that. I know that. The difference between us and the Concord is that we made peace with that fact a long time ago. Made peace with death. Made peace with the price. Nothing worth having comes free. Never has. I never will." He took a sip of the cold coffee. "Every name on the casualty list bought the rest of the galaxy another day. If we honor that by making those days count, then the price was worth it." Kreth was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My people do not think this way." "No," Meru agreed. "That is why you came to us." The turning point came 6 weeks into the campaign. Sharma's analytical team, working with data from dozens of engagements and hundreds of sensor beacons planted deep inside absence formations, made a discovery that changed everything. The absence was not mindless. It had a coordination center, a nexus, buried deep inside the largest construct at the heart of the swarm. The nexus was not a brain in the biological sense, but it served the same function. It processed information from every construct, it coordinated the swarm's movements, and directed the consumption of energy and matter. Without the nexus, the absence would lose its coordination. Individual constructs would continue to function, but they would no longer operate as a unified force. They would drift, fragment, become manageable. The nexus was, in simple terms, the off switch. The problem was getting to it. The nexus sat inside the largest construct, a thing so massive that it made planets look small. It was surrounded by thousands of smaller constructs, all of them armed with the energy-draining weapons that had destroyed the conquered fleet. Any ship approaching the Nexus would have to fight through layers of defenses that had been consuming fleets for longer than human civilization had existed. Cortez called a command meeting. Every human and Concord officer of flag rank attended. The room aboard the unconquered sun was packed. Sharma presented the data. She showed the Nexus, its location, its function. She showed the defenses surrounding it. She showed the projected casualties for any attempt to reach it. The room was silent when she finished. "The Nexus is the key," Cortez said. "We destroy it. We break the absence apart. The question is how." The Concord commanders offered suggestions. Long-range bombardment, siege tactics, slowly wearing down the outer defenses over months of sustained combat. All of them were logical, all of them were sound, and all of them would take too long. The absence would reach the core worlds before a siege could work. Then Cortez presented the human plan. She called it Operation Spite. The name itself made the Concord officers uncomfortable. The plan was simple in concept and insane in execution. A strike fleet of 200 ships would punch directly through the absent swarm, driving straight for the Nexus at maximum speed. They would use nuclear pulse drives for acceleration, gravitational slingshots around intermediate constructs for course correction, and sheer concentrated firepower to blast a path through the defenses. When they reached the Nexus, they would detonate a chain of antimatter warheads inside it. The survival odds for the strike fleet were calculated at 4%. The room erupted. Hive Admiral Chelcree called the plan suicidal. The Vithori commander called it wasteful. The Luminar delegate, Solith, who had been embedded with the fleet since the beginning, simply stared at Cortez with an expression that might have been horror or might have been something else entirely. "You are proposing to sacrifice 200 ships and their crews on a 4% chance of success," Chelcree said. "This is not strategy. This is madness." Cortez did not argue with him. She looked at Meru, who was standing near the back of the room. "Captain Meru," she said, "your assessment." Meru stepped forward. He was still wearing the same uniform he had worn on the last deep penetration run. He had not had time to change it. 4% is enough," he said. "We have fought with worse odds and won. At Thermopylae, at Midway, at Stalingrad, at Ceres Station. Humans have been walking into impossible odds since the beginning of our history. Not because we are stupid, because sometimes impossible odds are the only odds you get." He looked at Chelcree. "Your fleet fought the absence once. You lost 90% of your ships in 90 minutes because you fought the way you always fight. Careful, logical, and predictable. We do not fight that way. We fight like we have nothing to lose, because that is when we are most dangerous." Chelcree's compound eyes flickered. "And if you fail? Then we fail, and someone else finds another way. But we do not fail by standing still. We fail by not trying." Cortez looked at the room. "This plan requires volunteers only. No one will be ordered to fly this mission." She activated the fleet-wide communication channel. "All Terran vessels, this is Admiral Cortez. I am asking for volunteers for a strike mission with an estimated 4% survival rate. The target is the coordination nexus of the absence. The objective is to end this war. Anyone willing to fly this mission, signal readiness." The responses came back within seconds. Not one by one, all at once. Every single human ship in the fleet signaled readiness. 1,200 green lights on the tactical display, flashing simultaneously. Every ship, every crew, every sailor, marine, pilot, medic, engineer, and cook in the Terran fleet volunteered to fly into the heart of the darkness with a 4% chance of coming back. The Concord officers stared at the display. Chelcree's compound eyes went wide. Solith's fronds turned white. The Vithori commander, Kreth, who had sat across from Meru in the wardroom and asked how he could drink coffee after losing friends, put her hand over her mouth. "All of them," she whispered. "Every single one." Meru looked at her. "What did you expect?" She shook her head slowly. "I do not know, but not this." Cortez selected the 200 ships for the strike fleet. She chose the fastest, the toughest, and the crews with the most combat experience. Captain Meru was given command of the Spearhead, the first wave that would break through the outer defenses and clear the path for the antimatter ships. The rest of the fleet would hold the line, human and Concord ships together, keeping the absence's main force occupied while the strike fleet made its run. Preparations took 3 days. On the second day, Ambassador Voss sent a message from Geneva Station. But it was short. "I am proud of you. All of you. Come home." On the third day, while the fleet made its final preparations, A Drelkathi hive commander named Selketh approached Cortez. Selketh had been one of the most vocal opponents of human involvement in the war. He had called humans an invasive species. He had argued against every human tactical proposal. He had complained loudly and repeatedly that the humans were reckless, undisciplined, and dangerous. Now he stood in front of Cortez and said, "I wish to volunteer my ships for the strike fleet." Cortez looked at him. "The mission is for human crews only." "I know. I am asking you to make an exception." "Why?" Selketh was quiet for a moment. His compound eyes moved in patterns that Cortez had learned to recognize as deep thought. "Because I was wrong about your species," he said. "I called you invasive. I called you dangerous. I was not wrong about the danger, but I was wrong about what it meant. You are not dangerous because you want to destroy. You are dangerous because you refuse to stop. You refuse to give up. You refuse to leave someone behind, even when it costs you everything." He straightened. "I have watched your soldiers fight and die for worlds that are not their own, for species that refuse to let them sit at the table, for a galaxy that called them monsters, and they did it without hesitation, without resentment, without asking for anything in return." His voice was steady now. "I was wrong, and if your people are willing to die for mine, then my people should be willing to die beside yours." Cortez looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. "Welcome to Operation Spite, Commander. And try to keep up." That evening, aboard the Steady Horizon, Maru sat in his quarters and looked at a photograph taped to the bulkhead above his desk. It was old. A real photograph, printed on paper, creased and faded. It showed a woman and two children standing in a garden on Earth. The woman was laughing. The children were covered in mud. His family. He had not seen them in 2 years. He had not spoken to them in weeks. Communication blackouts during combat operations. They knew where he was. They knew what he did. They did not know about Operation Spite. He thought about writing them a letter, a just-in-case letter. The kind of letter soldiers had been writing since the invention of writing itself. The letter that starts with, "If you are reading this," and ends with, "I love you." He picked up a pen. He put it down. And he picked it up again. He wrote 3 words, not the ones he had planned, just 3 words that said everything he needed to say. "I am coming home." He did not know if it was a promise or a lie. It did not matter. Humans had always been better at hoping than at calculating odds. He taped the letter next to the photograph, turned off the light, and went to sleep. He would need the rest. Across the fleet, on the unconquered sun, Cortez received a message from Archspeaker Yathari. It had been transmitted from Valith Prime, across a distance so vast that the signal had taken hours to arrive. It was short, just 2 sentences. "We were wrong about your kind, not about the danger, about what it was for." Cortez read it once. She read it again. Then she closed the message, put on her uniform, and went to the bridge. Tomorrow, they would fly into the dark. Tonight, they were still alive. And that was enough. The strike fleet launched at dawn. Not that dawn meant anything in the blackness of deep space, but Admiral Cortez gave the order at the precise moment that the sun rose over the Pacific Ocean on Earth, 16 light-years away. She did not explain why. She did not need to. Every human in the fleet understood. They were going toward the light even as they flew into the dark. 212 ships, 200 human, 12 Drelkathi, under Commander Selketh, who had asked to die beside them. Each ship was loaded with enough firepower to crack a small moon. The antimatter warheads, 17 of them, each one capable of converting a mountain into energy, were distributed across the fastest ships in the formation. And Captain Jonah Meru commanded the spearhead from the bridge of the Steady Horizon, the same ship that had carried Ambassador Voss home in defeat after her 14th petition, the same ship that had survived a dozen deep penetration runs into the heart of the absence, the same ship that was now heading into the place where ships went to die. The Steady Horizon was not a beautiful ship. She was scarred and patched and burned. Her hull was more repair welds than original metal. Her engines ran hot. Her weapon systems had been modified so many times that her maintenance crew kept the original schematics as a joke. She was ugly and stubborn, and she refused to quit. She was the most human ship in the fleet. "All ships, this is Spearhead Lead," Meru said over the strike fleet channel. His voice was calm, steady, in the voice of a man who had made his peace with whatever was coming. Formation check. 212 confirmations came back. Every ship in position, every crew ready. Operation Spite is a go, Meru said. Stay tight, stay fast. If you fall behind, we will come back for you. If your ship is hit, point it at the nearest enemy and let it go with everything you have. Nothing is wasted. Not a ship, not a shot, not a single second. He paused. I am not going to make a speech. You know why we are here? You know what is at stake. You know the odds. And you volunteered anyway, because that is what we do. Another pause. Shorter this time. Give them hell. Spearhead out. The fleet accelerated. Behind them, the main fleet, human and Concord ships together, over 1,000 vessels, engaged the Absence's outer formations. In the diversionary attack was designed to draw as many constructs as possible away from the core, clearing a path for the strike fleet. It worked, partially. Hundreds of smaller Absence constructs peeled off to engage the main fleet, opening gaps in the swarm. The strike fleet hit those gaps at full speed. The first layer of defenses was the thinnest. Smaller constructs, each one the size of a capital ship, moved to intercept. Meru's spearhead cut through them like a knife. Human ships fired in coordinated volleys, each ship targeting a specific construct with a specific weapon type based on weeks of combat data. They knew which weapons worked best on which configurations. They knew the timing of the enemy's energy-draining beams. They knew how long they could stay in one place before they had to move. They knew because other humans had died learning these things. The first casualties came 7 minutes into the run. A destroyer on the left flank, the Defiant, took a direct hit from an energy beam and went dark. Her crew had 3 seconds of battery power left. Her captain, a woman named Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park, used those 3 seconds to angle the Defiant's nose toward the nearest Absence construct and ignite the ship's remaining munitions. The explosion tore a hole in the construct large enough for 6 ships to fly through. Meru did not slow down. There was no time for mourning. Not yet. Push through the gap. All ships, increase speed. Do not stop for anything. They pushed through. The second layer of defenses was thicker. The constructs here were larger, some as big as space stations. They moved with more purpose. We're closing gaps and redirecting interceptors to block the strike fleet's path. The humans adapted in real time. Squadrons split and reformed. Ships that were damaged but still mobile acted as shields for the antimatter carriers. Pilots made decisions in fractions of seconds that would have taken a Concorde tactical computer minutes to calculate. It was not clean. It was not elegant. Ships collided with constructs and with each other. Escape pods tumbled through the wreckage. Explosions lit up the darkness in chains of white and orange and terrible, beautiful blue. Commander Selketh's Drolkathi squadron fought alongside the human ships. The hive mind operated differently. Each ship an extension of Selketh's collective consciousness, but they matched the human tempo. When a gap needed to be held, they held it. When a sacrifice was needed, they gave it. 3 of his 12 ships were gone by the time they cleared the second layer. He did not hesitate. He drove the remaining 9 forward, deeper into the darkness, following the humans into the mouth of something that had been eating galaxies since before his species learned to count. The third layer was the worst. The constructs here were enormous. Planet-sized masses of dark material that bent light around them like gravitational lenses. The space between them was a killing field of energy beams and interceptor swarms. The strike fleet had to navigate through gaps that shifted and closed without warning, dodging threats that sensors could barely detect. Ships died in clusters. A frigate would take a hit, lose power, and drift into the path of the ship behind it. Were crews ejected in escape pods and were immediately swarmed by interceptors. Some pods were recovered by trailing ships. Most were not. Meru drove the steady horizon forward. His bridge crew was working in focused silence, each person doing their job with the precision of people who knew they were probably going to die and had decided to spend their last minutes doing the only thing that mattered. His weapons officer, a young man named Ensign Cole, reported that the forward guns were overheating. Meru told him to keep firing. His engineer, Chief Vasquez, reported that the main reactor was redlining. Meru told her to push it higher. His navigator, Lieutenant Kim, reported that the path ahead was closing. Meru told her to find another one, and she did, because that was what humans did. They found a way. They always found a way. Now 100 ships made it through the third layer. Half the strike fleet gone in 30 minutes. The survivors regrouped in a brief pocket of open space between the third and fourth layers. The antimatter carriers were still intact. All 17 warheads accounted for. Meru opened a channel to the surviving ships. "Sound off! Who is still with me?" 104 voices came back. Human and Drelkathi, battered, burned, broken, but still flying. "The Nexus is ahead. 12 minutes at current speed. We push through one more layer, deliver the package, and get out." He paused. "Those of you who still have engines, stay with the carriers. Those of you who do not, you know what to do." He did not need to explain. The ships that could no longer keep up would turn and face the pursuing constructs, buying time for the rest with their destruction. 23 ships peeled off from the formation and reversed course. 23 crews, hundreds of people, turning their dying ships into weapons. They flew back into the swarm and detonated everything they had. The explosions blinded sensors for miles. The pursuing constructs were shattered, scattered, momentarily disoriented. It was not much time. Maybe 3 minutes. It was enough. The remaining 81 ships plunged into the fourth and final layer. The Nexus was visible now, not to the naked eye, but to sensors. It was a structure at the center of the largest construct, pulsing with energy signatures unlike anything in the known galaxy. It was the heart of the absence, the brain. The thing that made a swarm into an army, and an army into a force that had eaten civilizations across millions of years. It was also defended by the heaviest concentration of constructs the humans had ever encountered. The space around the Nexus was so thick with enemy structures that it looked solid on sensors. A wall of darkness with a glowing core. "All ships, weapons free," Meru said. "Clear a path to the Nexus. Do whatever it takes." The final push was not a battle. It was a storm. Ships attacked from every direction at once. Some flew directly into constructs, detonating on impact. Others used their last missiles and then rammed the wreckage with their bare hulls. Escape pods were launched toward the Concorde fleet far behind, and then the empty ships were turned into guided missiles. With Commander Selketh's last 4 Drelkathi ships formed a wedge and drove into the densest concentration of defenders, opening a corridor directly to the Nexus. Selketh's collective consciousness felt each ship die, felt the connections sever one by one, like losing limbs. But the hive mind held. It held because, for the first time in Drelkathi history, it was not fighting for the hive. It was fighting for something bigger. The corridor opened. Meru saw it on the tactical display, a narrow, unstable gap in the defenses, already closing. "Antimatter carriers, go. Go now." 6 ships carrying the warheads accelerated through the gap. 3 made it. 3 were caught by energy beams and went dark, their precious cargo drifting uselessly through the void. But 3 was enough. 3 ships reached the outer surface of the Nexus structure and drove themselves inside, their hulls tearing through material that was not quite metal and not quite flesh. The warheads needed to be detonated deep inside the Nexus. The deeper, the better. The 3 carriers burrowed into the structure, their crews fighting to maintain control as the ship around them was consumed by the Nexus's defenses. 2 of the carriers detonated early, their crews dead, their automatic systems triggering the warheads when hull integrity was lost. The explosions were massive but shallow, tearing away outer layers of the Nexus without reaching the core. The 3rd carrier was the Steady Horizon. Meru had transferred the last antimatter warhead to his own ship when the plan became clear. The Steady Horizon was the only ship tough enough, stubborn enough, armed and fast enough to make the final run. So he did what he always did. He flew toward the thing that needed to be done. The Steady Horizon drove into the Nexus like a spear into flesh. The structure closed around the ship, trying to absorb it, trying to drain its power. Meru rerouted every system on the ship to the engines. Life support went first, then weapons, then sensors. The bridge went dark except for the glow of the reactor readout and the arming display for the antimatter warhead. His crew was gone. Vasquez had been killed when the engine room was breached. Cole was unconscious from decompression. Kim had ejected in the last escape pod, which Meru had ordered launched over her screaming protests. He was alone on the bridge of a dying ship inside the heart of something that had destroyed civilizations. The reactor was failing. Wara, the engines were failing. The ship was being pulled apart around him, but the warhead was armed. Meru sat in the captain's chair. The bridge was silent except for the groaning of the hull and the steady beep of the arming display. Through a crack in the viewport, he could see the interior of the Nexus, a vast, pulsing space of energy and structure, beautiful in a way that was almost painful. This was the mind of something older than his species, older than his world, older than most of the stars in the sky. And he was going to kill it. He reached up and pulled the photograph from where he had taped it above his console. The woman, the children, the garden, the mud. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at the detonation switch. "Humanity sends its regard," he said. He pressed it. Watched the antimatter warhead detonated inside the core of the Nexus. The explosion was beyond measurement. Energy poured outward from the Nexus in a wave that sensors across the Therac expanse detected simultaneously. The largest construct, the one housing the Nexus, cracked open like an egg, light pouring from the fractures in blinding streams. And then something happened that no one had dared to hope for. The absence stopped. Across the entire swarm, every construct went still at the same instant. The energy beam shut off. The interceptor stopped moving. The slow, relentless advance that had consumed worlds and fleets and civilizations paused. Then slowly, the constructs began to drift. Without the Nexus coordinating them, they lost purpose. They lost direction. They became what they had always been beneath the collective intelligence: empty structures, machines without a mind. Some continued to absorb energy from nearby sources, a reflex, not a strategy. Others simply went dark, their systems shutting down one by one like candles burning out in a room that no one was watching. It was over. Across the main fleet, the Concorde ships watched their sensor displays in silence. The red markers that had been spreading across the galactic map for months stopped moving. Then one by one, they began to dim. A Selvan communications officer was the first to speak. "The enemy has ceased all coordinated activity. The swarm is fragmenting." Then a human voice, ragged and exhausted, from one of the surviving strike fleet ships. "Spearhead lead, this is Spearhead 7. The Nexus is destroyed. The mission is complete." A pause. Captain Meru's ship did not survive. The bridge of the unconquered sun was silent. Admiral Cortez stood at the tactical display, watching the red markers fade. Her face was still. Her hands were at her sides. She did not move for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "How many came back?" 11 ships, ma'am, out of 212. 11. Cortez closed her eyes. She breathed. When she opened them again, her voice was steady. "Recover all survivors, all escape pods, all wreckage. Everybody we can find. We bring everyone home." "Yes, ma'am." She turned and walked off the bridge. In the corridor outside, where no one could see her, she put her hand against the bulkhead and stood there for a moment, head bowed, breathing slowly. Then she straightened up, walked back to the bridge, and Ellen started giving orders. There was still work to do. There was always work to do. The cleanup took months. The fragmented constructs of the absence drifted through the Therac expanse like the bones of some enormous dead animal. Some still posed a danger, mindless machines that absorbed energy on contact. Concorde and human ships worked together to neutralize them, towing them into stars or breaking them apart with controlled demolitions. The colonies that had been consumed were gone. The people who had lived there were never found. Whatever the absence had done with them was a mystery that would haunt the galaxy for generations. But the advance had stopped. The darkness had been pushed back, and the galaxy was still there. The ceremony was held at the Hall of Concord on Valeth Prime, was the same hall where Ilara Voss had stood 14 times and been told no. The same hall where her species had been called dangerous and invasive and unfit for civilized company. Today the hall looked different. Human flags hung from the crystal walls alongside the banners of 4,000 species, the black and blue of the United Terran Command, the simple, stark emblem of Earth, a pale blue circle on a field of black. They had been placed there by Archspeaker Ythari himself, who had insisted on hanging them with his own hands. The hall was full, every seat taken, representatives from every species in the Concord, and for the first time a full human delegation. They sat in the front row, Admiral Cortez in her dress uniform, Lieutenant Sharma beside her, Dr. Reeves, Father Thomas, the crew of the 11 surviving strike fleet ships, Eka and hundreds of others. Some wore uniforms, some wore civilian clothes. All of them had the same look in their eyes, the look of people who had been through something that had changed them forever. Archspeaker Ithari stood at the central podium. His crystalline body shone brighter than Alara had ever seen it, the Selvayan expression of deep emotion, the kind that went beyond words. For 300 years, Ithari said, his voice filling the hall, this assembly classified the human species as Category 9, the highest danger classification in our system. We refused them membership. We rejected their petitions. We looked at their history and saw only violence, and we judged them for it. He paused. We were not wrong about the violence. We were wrong about everything else. He turned to face the human delegation. When the darkness came, and our fleets burned, and our worlds went silent, we looked across the galaxy for salvation, and the only hands that reached back were human hands, the same species we had rejected, the same species we had called monsters. They came, they fought, they died, thousands of them, for worlds that were not theirs, and for people who had never shown them kindness. His voice dropped. I have lived for 400 years. I have served as Archspeaker for 60 of those years, and I have never been more ashamed of a decision than the ones this assembly made when we turned the humans away. Not because we were wrong about the danger, but because we failed to understand that danger in the right hands is the most precious thing in the universe. He stepped back from the podium and extended a crystalline hand toward the front row. I present to this assembly the representative of the human species, Ambassador Alara Voss. Alara stood. She walked to the podium. Her footsteps echoed in the silent hall, just as they had 14 times before. But this time, the silence was different. This time, it was not the silence of rejection. It was the silence of respect. She looked out at the assembly. 4,000 species, millions of eyes and sensors and organs of perception, all of them watching her, waiting. She had thought about this moment for a long time. She had written speeches, long ones, eloquent ones, speeches full of righteous anger and justified pride, speeches that would have made the Concord feel small for what it had done. She threw them all away. Instead, she spoke simply. I am not going to talk about what this assembly did wrong, she said. You know what you did, and we know why you did it. Fear is a powerful thing, and we have given the galaxy many reasons to be afraid of us. She paused. I am going to talk about the people who are not here today. She activated a display. Names began to scroll across the holographic screen above her. Thousands of names, human names, Drelkathi designations, the names of every being who had died in the war against the absence. These are the people who saved you, Voss said. Sailors and soldiers and pilots and medics. People who left their families and flew into the dark because someone they had never met needed help. She let the names scroll. Captain Jonah Meru, commander of the Steady Horizon, father of 2. He flew his ship into the heart of the absence and detonated the warhead that ended the war. His last words were a message to the galaxy from the species you called too dangerous to sit at your table. She looked at Ithari. You called us dangerous. You were right. But dangerous is not the same as evil. A fire is dangerous. It can also be the only thing between you and the dark. The names continued to scroll. The hall was silent, except for the soft hum of the display. We did not fight for you because we wanted to prove you wrong, Voss said. We did not fight for revenge or recognition. We fought because that is who we are. When something threatens the people around us, we stand up. It does not matter if those people like us. It does not matter if they rejected us. It does not matter if they are afraid of us. Now, may we stand up anyway? She turned to the assembly. So here is what I ask. Do not remember us as the species that saved you. Remember us as the species that chose to. And remember the dead, all of them, human and otherwise, not as heroes, but as people. People who were scared and brave and imperfect and extraordinary. People who decided that the galaxy was worth fighting for. She stepped back from the podium. The hall was absolutely still. Then slowly, a sound began. It started with the Drolkathi, a deep, resonant humming that was their species' highest form of honor. Then the Vaithori joined, beating their tails against the floor in a rhythmic pulse. The Selvan began to glow, their crystalline bodies brightening until the hall filled with light. The Luminar extended their fronds and turned their faces toward the human delegation, when bathing them in the soft bioluminescence that their species reserved for moments of sacred gratitude. One by one, every species in the Concord rose, in whatever way their biology allowed, and paid tribute. Some stood, some floated, some hummed, some glowed, some produced sounds that humans could not hear but could feel in their bones. 4,000 species. One moment. One word that none of them spoke, but all of them meant. Thank you. Elara stood at the podium and let the sound wash over her. Her eyes were bright. She did not cry. She had done enough crying in private, over the years, over the rejections, over the names on that scrolling list. This moment was not for tears. This moment was for the living and the dead. For the people who had fought and the people who had waited and the people who had believed, even when no one else did, or that humanity was worth believing in. Admiral Cortez in the front row sat straight-backed and still. A single tear tracked down her cheek, but her expression did not change. Beside her, Lieutenant Sharma smiled, a small, private smile that held more pride than words could carry. In the crowd, Commander Selketh, one of the 3 Drelkathi survivors of Operation Spite, added his voice to the hive mind's tribute. He had entered the war calling humans an invasive species. He left it calling them family. The Drelkathi did not have a word for what the humans had done, so Selketh made one. In the hive mind's ancient language, it translated roughly to, "Those who burn so that others may see." The ceremony ended. The assembly formally admitted humanity as a founding member of the Reformed Galactic Concord. New charters were signed. New alliances were forged. The galaxy began the slow, painful process of rebuilding. And on Earth, in a garden that was smaller than it used to be because the children had grown, a woman looked up at the night sky. She was holding a letter, 3 words written in a hand she knew better than her own. I am coming home. He had not come home. She knew that. She had known it for months, but she held the letter and looked at the stars, and she allowed herself to believe that somewhere, in some way she could not understand, he was still out there, still flying, still stubborn, still refusing to quit. That was the human way. Years passed. On a Concord world far from Earth, a child of the Luminar species sat in a garden with her parent. She was young, barely old enough to process light, and she was curious about everything. Tell me about the humans, she said. Her parent paused. The question was common among children born after the war. The humans had become something between a legend and a lullaby, a story told to explain why the stars were still there. The humans, her parent said, are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The child's fronds shifted in alarm. Are they scary? Very. Then why do we let them be our friends? The parent looked at the sky. The stars were bright tonight. They were always bright because someone had fought to keep them that way. Because, little one, they are dangerous the way a fire is dangerous. It can burn you. It can destroy everything you love. But when the night is dark and the cold is deep and something terrible is coming through the shadows, fire is the only thing that keeps you alive. The child thought about this. So they are good? The parent smiled, or performed the luminar equivalent, a gentle ripple of bioluminescence. They are human, and we are grateful, every single day, that they are on our side. The child accepted this. She went back to playing in the garden, chasing small insects through the light, as children everywhere have always done. And above her the stars burned on. Somewhere among them, on a pale blue world orbiting an unremarkable star in an unfashionable arm of the galaxy, the most dangerous species in the known universe was going about its day. They argued with each other and helped each other and made terrible decisions and beautiful art, and went to war and fell in love and raised their children and buried their dead and looked up at the sky that they had bled to protect. They were messy, complicated, violent, kind, terrifying, wonderful, broken in 100 ways and refusing, absolutely refusing to stay down. They were human, and the galaxy was better for it.